Hello, and welcome to Ask an Archaeologist. I'm Paul Duncan McGarrity.
Hello, and Happy New Year. Welcome to another year of Ask an Archaeologist. I hope you're all well. I hope you've had a nice festive period. It's nice to have you back again. What is going to be happening? Oh, some of you may have already seen this, but I have launched into my first foyer. Foyer? No, that's the front of the building. I've started doing YouTube videos, or at least I've done one. We'll see how it goes. So if anyone's interested, it's out under the archaeology of Doctor Who. I'm looking at how archaeology was depicted in the New Year's Day episode of The Doctor, an episode called Resolution. So if you want to check that out, it's over on YouTube. I guess I'll put a link to it in the description of this, if I remember. So that's cool. And generally, it's back to the same old, same old. So next episode is likely to be a question and answer one. So if you would like to have any of your questions answered, I've had a couple of them in, so we're just collating them at the moment. And if you want to send any more, you can do on @AskAnArch, or you can go to the Facebook page and drop me a message there. There's loads of different ways you can get in touch with me. But is there anything else I want to tell you about? No, not really. Just again, it's always nice to hear from people, even if you haven't got a question. Just get in touch. It's genuinely like there's been a few interactions over Christmas as well, which have been lovely, and I can't thank you all enough. It's still less than a year since I took over doing this whole thing on my own, and the response from everyone is consistently fantastic. So cheers for that. It's really cool. I've only had a few people shout at me about spaceships, so you know, I think my interaction with the internet's going better than. This interview you're about to hear is with Lucie Altenburg. She is a conservator for the Museum of London, and she's really lovely, and I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think about it, feedback, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff, all that internet stuff. Like, share, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. If you have any specific people you'd like me to interview, let me know, because I'm always looking to take angles that are of interest to the audience. So if there's anything specifically you'd like to learn about or hear about, drop me a line and I'll see what I can do. All right, here's Lucie Altenburg. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Bonjour.
Ça va?
Oui, très bien, merci.
And that's the end of my schoolboy French.
I thought that was the end of the podcast.
No. That's finally we've used it. I finally got one of my podcasts in a foreign language, and we can relax. Done. No. I never learned French. I had to do Spanish and German at school.
Oh, I did German at school too.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we can't. Well, as long as you want to know where the town hall is, I can talk to you about that.
That way we can probably share that information.
I
I
was
can
gonna
already
say,
tell how many cats I have.
How much German do you have?
A bit more than probably I should need, because my grandfather's German.
Really?
So he insists on kind of like, like to put some German everywhere, and I just.
So you've got German,
yeah,
Japanese,
yes,
French,
yeah,
and you live in England.
Yes.
I think you might be the best of all things.
My parents live in Spain, if that helps.
Oh, massively.
Yay. And I have family in the States too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So you, first of all, hello.
Hello.
Hello, Lucie. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. So you are French?
Partly, yes.
Partly French.
Half French.
Half French.
Yes, I am.
Excellent. And so you are my first French person on the podcast.
I'm very honoured.
And I'm going to ask you the same question as everyone else. How did you get involved in archaeology?
How did I get involved in archaeology? Well, it sort of started because at school, the only thing I was good at was Latin and Greek.
Oh my goodness. That is such an incredible nerd boast.
Thanks.
Guys, I'm just really good at Latin and Greek.
That's the only thing I can do. I can ride a horse, speak Latin and Greek. Life skills.
I was going to say, so you can lead a Roman army into battle.
I can, yes. I can do that.
If you find yourself in Elysium, you're already dead. But in Latin.
If Julius Caesar should rise again, I could help him invade again.
Oh, good! If that ever happens, I know. Lucy, you're not going to believe this.
No.
It happened.
Oh my god! Okay, right, I'm ready for that day.
So you're doing Latin and Greek at school. Also, what a school!
I went to the Lycée Henri IV in Paris. And they are very kind of pompous, so they like to do the Latin and Greek, so they take it to quite a high level, and I was very lucky with that.
Oh, that's cool.
And of course, you're just like, oh my god, I know how to translate these people, I need to figure out how they lived. So despite, well, my parents were very encouraging about it, and we all looked at classic archaeology degrees in France, and then we looked in the States, and then we looked at London. Well, sorry, there's other places in Great Britain aside from London.
But
realised
London called you.
London called.
Yeah.
And it kind of made sense. So I had a look at different universities, and then UCL had a great classical archaeology program. And so I was just like, yeah, I want to do that.
Brilliant.
So I landed in London in 2010.
I know you were saying that it was the language side of things that got you into it, but had you ever sort of like when you were little, did you go to visit historical sites and things like that? Or was it kind of like, I've got this skill, I need to find a way of using it?
Okay, I'm like nerd alert again.
I think anyone listening to Ask an Archaeologist has an inferred nerd alert.
Great, so I don't have to warn disclaimer, this is a nerd alert. I love dinosaurs. So I would go to the Natural History Museum with my dad here in London.
Yeah. And
we lived in New York for a year, so he'd take me to the Metropolitan and see the mummies.
Oh, very cool.
And the bedtime stories that I would get were usually kind of like Roman mummies related.
Roman mummies related?
Yeah, I had a story of Cleopatra and Mark Antony.
Oh, wow.
And that was a good story. I like that.
That's
so
really cool.
I've always liked ancient history, and I'm pretty sure I did these kiddies sand pits where you kind of dig for fake coins.
Yeah,
and you're just
oh
my god, I found a Roman coin. And you didn't.
Because obviously you grew up. Did you grow up in Paris or nearby?
So it's a complicated answer. Do you want just a short answer?
We can go for the complicated short answer.
All right. So I was born in Tokyo.
You were born in Tokyo,
and I lived a few years there. And then we moved to Germany, and we lived a few years in Frankfurt. And I lived in Paris for a few years, then we moved to New York for a year, and then I came back to Paris in 2000 and stayed there for another 10 years. Okay,
so how old were you when you got back to Paris the second time?
Roughly around 7 years old.
About 7 years old, good. So that means, right, that does mean that the question now, I wanted to know, you've been in England a few years now, and you're working within the heritage industry here, which we'll get to in a bit, but as a 7-year-old in France, what are they like with regards engaging younger people in sort of the ideas of archaeology?
I think at the time when I was there, it's probably not as pronounced as it would be now. I was very lucky, my parents are very into museums, so we would go to museums all the time, and every time we travelled we went to museums.
Yeah.
But I would probably say that the only thing that kind of pushed me into Latin and Greek was the fact that Latin was compulsory for a year.
Oh, really?
When you're you turn 11 and they're like, you must do Latin for at least a year.
We need you to sound like you know spells.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's the root of our language, and you must know how a little bit about it.
Liberatus tuti me ex inferus.
Don't know what that means.
It means save yourself from hell. A useful phrase.
But I actually sort of knew what that means. No, I'm just saying that. But yeah, so it was mostly because I got pushed into that year of Latin that I kind of figured out a bit more about it. and thanks to my parents. But I think in school, they do take you to museums sometimes for like a day trip.
Yeah.
But that's probably the extent of it. It was a bit...
Mm.
I would have liked to be a bit more involved with the heritage, I think.
Yeah. To see you
Back
as you go. What was it particularly then that drew you to coming and studying in?
I think the really determining factor was that the degree in London involved a physical aspect. You actually went on site during the first year, whereas in France you had to do a bit more of art history first, and then you kind of built your way to it. I just wanted to be on site.
You wanted to dig holes.
I really wanted to dig holes. So that's why I ended up choosing the London degree.
You ended up going to the Institute of Archaeology, didn't you?
I did,
UCL. Yes. When you went, I think you were there a few years after I graduated.
Really?
Yeah. So I have to ask, did they still send you off for Primtech?
Oh, yes, I did. We
for clarity,
famously...
Primtech is where they decide that you're not nerdy enough in the first week. So when everyone else is having their Freshers' Week, where they get to meet all the new people and join all the clubs, they send us to a field full of tents and alcohol and do primitive technology or experimental archaeology.
It is meant to be a bonding experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We famously had the worst one in a few years.
The worst what? The rain?
The rain.
Yes.
The flooded tents.
Oh, interesting.
The mud.
Mine was so cold that, I mean, if you want to talk a bonding experience, on the second night there were 7 of us in a 2-man tent, just holding each other for warmth. It was like we were trying to survive a war story.
Oh my gosh. That's so sad.
When you roll over and hook someone and go, and you are...
You're just getting cozy, sorry, don't know your name, but that's fine.
But yeah, it's quite the experience. What kind of things did you do when you were doing Primtech?
Oh, I had the worst ones because I left it too late. So while people were off kind of butchering deer and stuff like that, building a bonfire, I was grinding grain to make flour.
Oh!
And I did flint napping, which was fun, but
That's cool,
you do that as a kid, so I know this.
No, not everyone flint naps as a kid.
Okay, fine, right. That's what I did as a kid.
Chutter into yourself in Latin making stone tools.
No, just don't mind me. What else did I do? I did pottery, probably.
Yeah. That's quite cool. I got up late one morning with a hangover and signed up for a scavenging walk with the paleobotanists and all that sort of stuff. And when the walk started, I looked around and went, oh, I'm the only student who signed up. So I walked through the entire archaeobotany department looking at trees. Genuinely one of the best parts of the whole thing. They were like, that berry's poisonous. That one you can eat. I was like, oh.
Okay.
That's pollarding. That's it was like fascinating.
Okay.
Thank
Actually,
you.
that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah. Not at first.
No, I guess
not.
not.
Not when you're 18 and you're suddenly like, oh no, I'm walking with the nerds of the nerds.
Until that's when you realise that you're actually a nerd with them.
Yeah. Well, it didn't. It didn't stick.
Oh.
I got into buildings. So you do your undergraduate,
yes,
and all that sort of stuff. You start out, you want to dig holes.
Yeah.
But that's not what you do now.
That's not what I do. I don't dig
So
holes.
something changed in those 3 years. It might have been that you were completely soaked at Primtech.
I made it through Primtech. People dropped out. I made
Yeah.
it through. But interestingly enough, on my first week after Primtech, you have core courses with all the other archaeologists. And a conservator walked in to give us a talk about conservation, and it's like, this is when I realised, like, this is what I have to do.
Really? It was as quick as that?
It's like, ting, that made sense.
What was it about it that appealed to you? And with that kind of like lightning strike moment?
The lecturer was really cute. I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's where I need to go.
You're the worst 18-year-old.
Sorry. No, but he was like, I think it made sense because he was like, you can still be on site, you can still be doing your archaeological kind of knowledge, but you're also doing this other dimension of like working to like a further extent with the objects.
Yeah.
You're really kind of doing something else with them, not just kind of digging them up. And that's when it went like, oh my god, I must find out more. And so that's when I figured out UCL has a 3rd-year course for conservation for archaeologists.
Yeah.
So I took that.
Right.
And then I really liked that. So I was like,
yeah.
I must continue. And then I ended up on the degree.
Yeah, because they've got quite a large conservation lab at the institute,
Yes.
don't they? The 6th floor.
6th floor.
Yes.
We take up most of the 6th floor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great big windows.
Who else is on the 6th floor?
There's the staff common room.
Oh, of course there is.
Yeah. They tried to kick us out several times, but like, no, we like to be there.
You stay here.
It's like
So that desire to do conservation, 2nd week it hits in.
Yeah.
And you carry that all the way through. Do you have to like ring home and go, Mother, Father, I'm going to be a conservator? And they go, and what's that?
Yeah, they did. Especially since in France, the word for conservation also is relatable to like catering.
So they're like, how have you been put off so quickly?
It's like, what happened to you during that camping time? It's like, I want to be cooking.
I went and hung out with the archaeologists, and now I want to cook.
Must like hunt and gather. So they did a bit. They didn't know much. They've always been very open-minded, so they did kind of look into it very quickly, and they were like, "Oh, so this is what you would do."
Yeah.
Because I think conservation. It's interesting for me. It's a link between the UK and like the rest of Europe. I think it's very different.
Right.
Because for one thing, it's government funded in France, so it's like you're a public servant.
Right.
So it's very different in the way you approach it.
And
how you get into it.
How does that affect the kind of work that's being done and the kind of sites that are being investigated between the UK and France?
So this was interesting. Actually, I won a day trip to France to go into like their conservation school.
Right.
So I went there for a day trip about 3 weeks ago. L'Institut National du Patrimoine. Hello, if you remember me, you're listening. So they showed me around and they kind of showed me what they did, and it was interesting because they don't really have so much a separation between archaeology and the rest of the specialities.
Yeah.
So archaeology here, as an archaeological conservator, very general. So you kind of do everything that comes out of the ground. There, it's more kind of they do sculpture, they do textile, and then you kind of work on your knowledge. It's a lot more kind of specialized knowledge. And it was interesting because I was talking to them about how they did their job, and it's a lot more. They didn't have this kind of archaeology, go on site, get stuff out of site as much with the people I was talking to anyway, because it's more kind of you need like an archaeological service, and that's a whole different entity I'd really like to find out about because I really don't know that much about.
Yeah.
So I really want to keep the contact and see how I can learn from you.
Hey, tell me more things.
Say, tell me your deepest, darkest secret.
No, not that secret. Keep it archaeological. Oh, God.
Oh, too much information.
So you, as you say, you finish your 3-year degree, and then there's a master's.
Oh, yes. So the way UCL works, there are many, very many very good degrees. The one I went for was UCL.
Yeah.
Just because I'm lazy. And the way they do it is that you have to do a Master's of Arts first. And that's 1 year spent with the conservators, but you do a lot more theory, and it's your chance to kind of go into museums and volunteer as much as you can because you've got the time to do it.
Yeah.
And then you apply to get onto the Masters of Science, which is when you go into the 6th floor lab, and you spend 1 year being taught like material by material. And you've got a lot of practical work, and it's very kind of dedicated. And then they send you off into the world for a 10-month placement.
Oh, really? That's really interesting.
It's really good.
The practical elements of it. Is it one of those jobs where you learn more by doing than from the theory side of things?
It's a really the way of functioning in conservation is very interesting because it doesn't matter if you don't know about something on the first hand. So you're taught very general things about, say, leather, about wood, about how to treat them, and then you kind of set off on research projects. So if you don't know about something, it's not the end of the world. You can kind of go into the literature and do a bit of research. So it's like, I love Sherlock Holmes, so it's like this idea of like doing some research and like looking into the facts and like really doing kind of detective work is really interesting.
Is there kind of like a thing that, when you're working, is there one person in the lab who's like, oh, you want to know about paper? Talk to this guy. He's the paper guy.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You do branch out into different specialities, and if you don't know something, there is like a wide network of people you can just kind of go to. It's like, hey, I got a problem. Can you help me?
I understand. Obviously, you're saying the practical elements of things. You have to, do your own projects, your research projects. I understand one of your first ones that you looked at was an Asian figure, sort of like a dancer kind of thing.
About my Asian figure? How do you actually stalk me?
No, I do research.
Okay. Yes, it was my Asian figure.
Yeah, so that was quite interesting because I think it explains quite nicely the side of conservation that people don't realise. When I was doing it, you put it quite nicely. You said that it's the job of a conservator to retain, reveal, or recover the significance of an object. Can you explain that a little bit more, what that means?
So I think what people don't always realise is that, so the way the degree works is that objects are laid out on a table and then you get allocated one, and what people don't necessarily realise is that an object is not inherently stable when it's given to a conservator. So there's a lot of work.
When you say stable,
I mean,
do you mean like it's going to be okay?
Strong and
it's
stable.
It's going to be okay.
Sorry, it's going to be okay. So yeah, some materials are more prone to deterioration. So at different rates. So
do you mean things like if you've got metal, it might rust, or
exactly
the not ferrous version of rusting?
We can stick to rusting.
Is it still rusting?
Yeah. So you've got different objects, even like made out of the same material, might start rusting at different rates. So you kind of have to do this background research into the object. You have to think about how it was used during its life, because that will affect it. How it was kind of buried or how it was kept, because that will also affect how its kind of chemistry kind of works and how it might start breaking down. So there is this whole background research looking into like what it might have looked like before, how it might have been looked after, and then you kind of do this work with the owner, especially. So the Asian figure had an owner, and it had the owner had specific requests for that figure. So you have to work with them. It's like this dimension of
what were the requests?
Their requests. I was very free to do as much work as I wanted, but they wanted the spare parts, the parts that were missing, replaced.
I see. So it was, to give a mental image, it was a sort of a figure of, well, as you found out, potentially a man.
Potentially a man dressed as a woman.
Doing a kabuki geisha, is that right?
So it was a sort of a Japanese kind of theatre, where it's very traditional for men to dress up as women and do the female roles. And it's like maybe 20 centimetres high. It's very finely detailed, and there was a piece of the ponytail at the back and a piece of the sleeve missing when I was given.
Yes.
And
was it broken in half?
It was broken at half as well. It had been previously re-adhered, so there were elements of like the previous adhesive.
Yeah, it's basically been glued together.
It'd been glued together very lovingly.
Right. Are we talking about professionally glued together, or someone had a thing of super glue and was like, this'll do? It was the second one.
It was the second one. someone obviously really loved the figurine, and it'd broken at half, and it was like super glue.
Is there a point where, like, if you see those kind of things where you can see that they've tried to repair it, are you a little bit like, why did you use that glue?
I mean, like, there's always this inner monologue. It's like, oh my god, I would never have done this. Why did you do this? And then there's this other dimension of like, well, obviously it's a sign of its use and its history. Do I keep it?
Yeah, that's it. Because that's a part of the story. It's got that element of love for it to the point where they didn't throw it away immediately. They wanted to keep it.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did you do?
So in the end, I spoke to the owner. So we did go back to the owner and asked him, so, well, what would you like us to do? Would you like us to keep the adhesive in like a little bag in it? So would you like us to return it to you? And so he did tell us, can you record it? Can you like take notice that it was there? And then my mother did try to put it back together. Okay. So it's kept into the history of the object in our treatment records. But then can you, because it will hinder the way you put it back together, can you then take it off as best as you can?
Okay. Oh. You were like,
like, yay.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
So how do you? So you needed to replace the part. Hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Oh dear. Okay.
We still want to fully understand this idea of retain, reveal, and recover.
Yes.
Right. So what is significance of an object?
So the significance of the object, it's never the same thing for any object, and it's never the same thing for any person. It's what the object means to a person at a given time, and then what it will mean to future generations in a way, if that makes sense. So if you take the case of the figurine, well, it obviously meant a lot to the owner's mother because she tried to repair it, and it meant enough to him that he wanted to see it repaired in a much kind of more, in a stronger way, basically, because the adhesive had failed.
Yeah.
So it had this special kind of personal significance to him, and to me as a student, the significance was that I had an object and I had to repair it because it's part of my degree, So I have to put as many skills as I can into it. So it's really different depending on the object and depending to the people you're kind of talking to, because there is this new dimension to conservation that you have to talk to the owners of the object. So it might be a tribe, it might be a different country, so we're talking a lot about repatriation or kind of ways to display certain objects because they mean certain things to different people. And I think maybe in the past it was not so much kind of taken into account, but a lot more now. Conservators kind of sitting around the table.
There's a lot more interpretation within it.
There's a lot more work.
Some people I think might have an idea of like, oh, you just glue stuff together. Yeah. Right.
It's a lot less that now, and a lot more kind of like discussion about how we might glue it back together, or if it should be glued back together. Yeah. With the people it means most to.
Yeah, because my understanding is that the very simple thing of like, if something is damaged, the meaning of damage can be different to different groups. You know, I don't know if I'm correct with this, but I believe, from my historic standing buildings point of view, the thing that always fascinated me was with Japanese buildings. If they burned down and rebuilt in the same position, they're counted as the same building. It's like, well, no, that's a new building. It's like, no, it's 500 years old. But it burned down in the 30s.
It's the same building.
Yeah.
I think, conservation itself, I mean, it's got different kind of... People do conservation differently around the world. And I know in Japan, it's very much like if something is falling apart, then we will try and keep the skills alive. So you're trying to repair the piece using the skills so that the skills aren't lost forever. Yes. But it's still part of the building, and therefore it's just the same building.
Exactly.
You know. I
mean, you get to a point where you've replaced the handle and the head of the brush so many times.
Just like, it's still the same brush.
Same brush. So you've repaired... Oh, that's what I was going to say. Now let's get back to where I skipped back. So you've spoken to the owner, you've identified the significance of the piece, and now you have to replace some of the sections. So, how much artistic skill is involved in your job?
I think, quite a lot. I think you need to be quite dexterous with your hands. So if you like working with your hands, I mean, for instance, I play the piano, I knit, I make cosplay, I make costumes. I love working with my hands more than anything else. Yeah. So it was really kind of...
Any particular area of cosplay, or is it just a general kind of a...
I mean, I'm more into video games, so kind of Nintendo, Legend of Zelda. Yeah. That's my thing. Oh, cool. My friends are more into Final Fantasy and Fate.
Very big hair.
Yeah, I can't do the big hair.
No. Just do Walking Dead cosplay. It's so easy.
You say that. One of my friends is just a witch, and she's in her underwear and just painted and just go... And it works. She's
what, the witch from like Left 4 Dead 4?
Yes, with the really long claws. She kind of hides in the corner and just kind of starts crying, like softly crying, and people just like, she's doing
this. She does this for fun.
Oh yeah, she does it. Oh, that's great.
There's a crying girl over there. Oh, she's ruining Comic-Con again.
Oh no, there's the crying girl. But yeah, so if you're really dexterous with your hands, it's a really good field to get into because you really need. I had to kind of shape. You have to make a cast, and then you have to go and shape it, and then you have to really have a good eye for color matching. So you have to have because you're not matching to anything. You don't have the spare part, so you're matching it to the rest of the figurine, and the figurine was interesting because it'd been painted over porcelain, so you've got a bit of this translucent effect.
Right.
So it's not just black; it's kind of like slightly transparent, a bit grey in areas.
Interesting.
So you're using different painting techniques. You're mixing different varnishes.
Are you trying to replace it with the same material or a similar material, or are you? Obviously, this is going to change from object to object, but are you trying to make it so that people are able to identify where the additions have been made, or are you trying to make it like no one can see the joins?
So this is interesting because it's a whole different kind of problem, I think. But
Yeah.
for me personally, this is where I draw the line between conservation and restoration.
Right.
So personally, I would do it so that you could see it, but you'd have to be pretty close. So we have like this 6 feet 6 inch rule. So I work in like I don't work in your imperial metric, so I'm really sorry, but so
it's all right. That's one of my little brothers. 6 foot 6 inch. Well, he's actually 6 8, but anyway.
So basically, if you basically the idea is that if you've got an object in the case and you've got this like glass separation, you can't necessarily see a repair. But you'd have to get really kind of close to kind of see, that the colour's slightly different or the material is slightly different, and you can tell. Yeah. So this is how I kind of tend to work. So you could, I can't fire porcelain, so in the lab as well. So I made mine out of a special clay that we use to make for porcelain repairs because it's very kind of apt to working with it. And you are kind of like sitting there kind of slightly smaller, a bit more kind of curved, and you have to figure out a whole system to attach it. Yeah. It's interesting.
Is there an element as well that the repairs you make should be reversible?
Yes. So this is like a founding principle in conservation, is any kind of work we do to an object must be recorded and reversible. So the idea of reversibility is an interesting one because the truth is it's very hard to make anything reversible. So we're working very hard
if you're
towards
sticking
it.
Dry clay to porcelain, there's got to be a point where you're like, that's sticking. You know,
So,
at a microscopic level, there are bonds being formed.
it must not break again. But the idea is that any conservator that's behind us must be able to know what we've done. So this is why we keep a record.
The second there, when you said behind us, I was like,
Yeah.
what are you doing?
No. So in the near future, sorry, and not my native language.
No, absolutely nailing it. But it was just a lovely image. I'd like this one behind him and one behind her.
It's like a little line of conservators going like, yeah, put you down.
I wouldn't do it like that.
What
Is there anything kind of like between conservators? Is there a how much of a kind of like culture of I wouldn't do it like that?
There is, but I mean, I go and read my tutor's kind of like articles. I'm just like, this is an interesting. I personally would have done it differently, but you know, we don't criticize each other.
No. You just walk around museums going, oh, you've used that, have you?
Well, it does kind of ruin it a bit for you because you're walking around the museum going, okay, what have they done here?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Sort of like an archaeological Mean Girls.
It's like, yeah.
Oh, you used that clay.
I'm flipping my hair. It's like, no, I would have done it that way, but okay.
Yeah, fair enough.
And we're all very civil.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the idea is that in the near future, if the object needs to be treated again, because we've not done our job properly,
no. Is there a system of reevaluating work that's been done in the past if new techniques have come along? Or would you say that there's a point where you're like, this has been done in a different way, maybe not as good as what we would do now, but it's stable?
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, there's not always the time to go over like the massive archive museums have. But we do try to reevaluate the objects. So you have certain materials that are flagged up as being more kind of prone to needing a reevaluation. Yeah. So for instance, metals, because they do tend to have like an inner desire to kind of start corroding again and be like, yay! So this is like, so we do trying to, when we reevaluate, the idea is it, you might go back and say the treatment was not necessarily what I would have done, but you know what, the object is fine,
Yeah.
It's not corroding, it's not falling apart, and the environment it's kept in is brilliant.
Yeah.
So we're not going to do anything more unless it's needed for something else, let's say an exhibition, and you need to clean it up a bit. And then, because, the idea of reversibility is it's well ingrained into the conservation kind of ethics, but it's still relatively new.
Yeah.
So we are kind of only just starting to be like, I want to make sure that someone can go back and redo my work.
Yeah. Do you have an area of specialism? A bit that you're like, that's me?
Well, this is why I chose archaeology as a speciality in conservation, because you can branch out into paintings, which are very kind of like focused on paintings. Paper is also very specialized. You tend to have to go to like a really specific degree. Buildings conservation is also something completely different. What I like about archaeological conservation is that you do everything.
Right.
So you get to do wood, you get to do leather, you get to do paper, textile. You just have whatever comes out of the ground. I assume plastic soon.
Yeah. Plastic conservation is surely very easy.
You say that, but plastic is one of these really difficult materials that was... It was not meant to last... I mean, it does last. It's going to last forever, but it's not meant to last. It's causing all sorts of problems. And you are starting to get people there specializing in plastics because they have so many different issues.
Really?
They really do.
Do they degrade as, like, degradation of the plastic? Is that a problem?
It is.
Like, what kind of problems do they have?
Well, the main problem I'm aware of in plastics is that, so your flexible plastic, so you're bending in.
Yeah.
That is because the plastic itself is injected with plasticizers that make it flexible.
Right.
And these plasticizers tend to leach out. So this is where you might notice that really all plastic turns really sticky.
Yes.
And kind of sweaty. And it's just kind of... So that's the plasticizer kind of making its way out of the base plastic.
Oh.
And once all of that's out... all you have left is the really hard plastic, so that's really brittle, and that's when it starts kind of crazing, and that breaks.
Oh, man.
And it's just, we haven't figured out a way to prevent the plasticizer
from
reaching out yet. People are working on it, but it's just like a relatively new issue. So conservation is adapting to your everyday problems.
With your understanding of how materials work in sort of like in the world, how the world affects different materials, are you just the best at DIY?
You have to be very creative.
Yeah.
You really have to, because especially in archaeology, not every object responds to the same way to the same treatment. So you kind of have to be like, okay, this object is not behaving the way I expected to, or the way I've been taught to. What can I, in my backlog, in my archive of cases, what can I kind of then apply? Yeah. And then you're going around life, kind of coming around products, everyday products, and can I use that in conservation? Yeah, I might be able to, because we have magic sponges. We don't use them on objects, not yet.
I just like the idea of you walking around a B&Q.
Oh, yes, I could use that. Well, like, a colleague of mine was like, micellar water, take off makeup. That's great stuff. I wonder if we could use that in conservation. So I was actually, that might work.
That might work.
So it's very, you have to be very creative. Have a large imagination.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that might work.
You have like conservation. This is hard to say. Conservation conservation conferences. That's a surprisingly hard thing to say.
Try saying conservation conversation.
Whoa, I will not. Do you have like the conferences where it's just people with tables full of, these are the things I tried?
You say that, but we have there's quite a large body in the UK for conservators, and there's a worldwide international one where we tend to try and get together and discuss what we've been trying, new techniques, or bringing back old techniques. And then people are like, no, you must not do this. Oh, yeah, okay, that's interesting.
It's quite an international facing section of archaeology then, isn't it?
Yeah.
You are having to, because you're trying to deal with a lot of objects from a lot of places around the world with a lot of meaning to a lot of people, and you're trying to find the best practices.
And it's great because conservators all around the world do not do the same thing. So
Brilliant.
It's like, we don't even, amongst the same body, we have different ways of doing the same thing, and you're just we don't even have, it's complicated. There's not a universal way of doing conservation. But that's what's interesting about it.
Yeah. It's an object to object sort of thing?
It's case by case, yeah.
So you got sent out for your 10-month placement. Was that WCC storage move at the British Museum?
That was actually one of my volunteering projects.
Volunteering project?
Yeah, that was my summer project. On my own time, during the summer, writing my dissertation, I was like, I must wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and work for the British Museum.
Is it WCEC? WCEC storage? What are we calling it?
I just call it WCC.
Yeah, storage move. What is that?
So, I don't know if you're aware, but the British Museum recently built like a whole new kind of building next to their main museum.
I'm very aware. I dug the holes underneath it.
Oh, right, okay. There you go.
I found a dinosaur skeleton in the rubble.
No, you don't.
Well, please yourself, but yeah.
So the idea behind that, as a lowly volunteer would understand, was that you would then gather all the collections, because museums often have stores off-site, which is not always very kind of practical for people.
Yeah.
So the idea was to gather as much of the collections into one place. So my placement was at Orsman Road in Hackney, where the museum has like a little kind of storage room, like in Blythe House in Hammersmith. Was it Olympia? Sorry.
Yeah.
And we were going through all their objects and kind of taking them off, measuring them, checking their condition, and then repacking them and making them ready to kind of like move to the main museum.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing over the summer. I was like, I do not want to go on holiday, I want to go and work in the museum.
That sounds lots of fun. So you finish all your volunteer stuff, you do your place. Where did you place?
I placed at the Museum of London.
Well, this brings us up. So then you start working at the Museum of London, is that right?
Working at the Museum of London, yes.
Yes, and you're new to Museum of London Archaeology. Started in April?
Yes, I did. April, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, not even a year yet.
No.
You enjoyed it?
Yeah, I love it. It's great.
Good, glad to hear it. So at what point in the archaeological process do they bring conservators in? At what point do you get involved? At what point do you want to be involved?
I mean, I personally would like to be involved throughout the whole thing. I know it's not possible, but I love... So the first point of contact for a conservator is on site. So we try to be in contact with the archaeologists and the managers as much as possible. So you've got a few... So if you have like a really intricate composite object on site, which is causing
composite object, you mean?
So it's made of different materials, which is causing the archaeologists a bit of trouble.
So as a basic example of that, a knife would be a composite
or a pair
object.
of boots. Just funny yourself.
Oh, shall we do this pair of boots that was recently on the news?
Oh, actually, it was a very good conservator.
Somebody might have been involved in an interview with the BBC.
Oh, just twice in the morning and in the evening.
Did they ask you to put white cotton gloves on, or did?
No white cotton gloves. No,
because I've heard that previously. That there's this idea within the media that they want you to wear white cotton gloves.
They do, because I think it probably looks better on like TV. And the blue gloves that are made out of nitrile, so sort of like plastic, that we wear are very kind of flashy. They do tend to like blow out.
Yeah. The
perfect compromise is that we now have recyclable grey gloves.
Ooh.
Hey, which do look good. So I just put mine on for that.
Yeah, brilliant. So, as an example, composite object, some boots.
Some boots. Actually, it's not. I'm sorry, it's not a good example because there was nothing else but leather.
Okay. So knife.
A knife. A knife would be a really good example because your blade would have been made out of like an iron alloy often, and say a bone or ivory handle, and they have different problems. But in those cases, I think archaeologists would be more than like they would just pick it up and put it in. We do go to the archaeologists. We have toolbox with them. We tell them
because we get told there's certain ways you have to handle certain material. Leather you're supposed to keep wet.
Yes.
Wood you're supposed to keep wet.
Yes.
If you have a wooden handled knife, you're like, I don't know what to do with it. Do I wet it or do I dry it?
Exactly. So this is why we're very involved, and like I've been doing a lot of training with the archaeologists on site as much as I can. I try to offer it to the people at Mola as well. So they know how to deal with this, and so, for instance, if you are a wooden handle with like a metal kind of blade, you have to there are different factors you take into account. So which one is more likely to deteriorate faster, which one is likely to cause more problems in the future, and then that's how we we start that dialogue, and I'm really keen
Yeah.
to kind of start that dialogue.
It's almost
straight.
like an object triage.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're like, who's going to be causing the most problems?
Oh dear. Oh no.
What does cause the most problems? Or is it, again, depending on
It
the
really
soil
depends,
types and what's around?
It depends on the soil type. So if it's really wet, we would tend to say that probably the organic materials such as wood or leather would cause more problems. If it's really dry, then we would say you want to keep it dry as possible.
Yeah.
It's really kind of like, we go to the archaeologist and we're like, okay, what kind of site do you have? What kind of objects are you getting? Okay, this is what you need to do.
Yeah. Is there ever a case where you're having to consider what the impact of the object might be on the people, not just the impact of the people on the object?
Yeah, so you do have very delicate sites, kind of like they have kind of more. I'm thinking maybe like burial sites, where people might be going through, archaeologists might be going through a bit of a rough time.
So you're thinking psychologically.
Yeah.
So psychologically as well.
Okay.
I was thinking, are there physical objects that might
Oh yeah,
have
okay. All right. Sorry.
No, I like that. We'll go to that as well.
Okay. So yeah, you do have objects that are more problematic than others. You have objects that are maybe cracked in very different ways that you can't just lift out. Or you have objects that don't support their own weight because there's just too much that's gone. And can I mention the boots now?
Yes, you can mention the boots.
So you
For clarity, in case people missed this, there was a skeleton found in the foreshore.
Yes.
In a was he in a prone position?
He was face down on his belly.
Yes, with his arms kind of like outstretched.
Oh.
If one were to draw someone who had drunkenly fallen forwards, this guy would have been...
That would have been very accurate.
Pretty accurate. So he's in the mud. We don't know why he's there, or we don't know what caused his death.
No.
We do know he was wearing knee-high leather boots,
Yes.
which also survived. Did any other... This is the thing I didn't get in the story. The boots survived.
Yes.
The skeleton survived.
Yes.
Was he nude?
Well, this is a very interesting question.
Because I'm thinking of what a log situation like that.
I mean,
Or was it just that the clothing is far more delicate than the leather?
well, this is interesting because we did go there and be like, he's not wearing anything else, is he? Like, was he naked? We did ask ourselves as well because we didn't find. You would tend to find. I mean, in that kind of soil or the clay we found the boots in. The reason why we found the boots is because of the way they were buried, and that should have been a good environment for textiles to survive.
Yeah.
But then some kind of plant fibers don't tend to survive very well. So maybe he was wearing a cheap shirts, and or maybe he was running away from an angry husband, just kind of like in his bush. I was like, oh my god, that's my pet theory.
Oh, I like
Nobody
that.
condones it aside from myself.
Nobody is suggesting that that's what's happened. We've seen no evidence to the contrary.
No evidence to the contrary, indeed.
And they still let you talk to the BBC.
Yeah, I had to be very careful about what I said. But
I think genuinely I have been on a site where we found a similarly sort of prone skeleton, but without boots. And someone was left unattended next to a journalist, and they said, we think he was drunk and fell into a hole. I'm like, what, a hole that perfectly fit his body?
Oops.
Someone overheard that and kind of went,
Yeah, it's awkward.
So, you wanted to talk about the boots because you were dealing with...
I do love my boots.
So you got to do the conservation of
I got
those
to
then.
do the conservation. So this was like a first point. This is one of these interesting cases where the boots can support their own weight, and obviously they were still on the skeleton, so you had bones protruding, and we couldn't just take them out. So the archaeologist called me on site. I went to do a very special technique, which is called block lifting. So with the help of the osteologist, we removed the bones very carefully. Once they were recorded from around the boots, so the thigh bones, because contrary to press, they were not thigh-high boots. They were only knee-high.
Oh, really?
I'm so sorry.
That makes them almost 33% less sexy.
I'm so sorry. I know it's not a kinky boot situation.
I was thinking, Dr. Frankenfurter.
Sorry.
We finally found you.
So what we had to do is kind of cut out the kneecaps. So we had to make sure we took... I know, you take your glasses off. We had to take the thigh bones out. And a block lift is when you cut the soil around the object and cut deep enough into the layer that the soil is supporting the object.
Right.
And then you cut underneath, and you pick up the object from underneath.
Yes, and you're taking the whole soil with it.
Yeah, it was a big job.
Yeah. Do you wrap that soil as well? Because obviously that's initially going to hold its form, but it's going to come apart, isn't it?
So this is a case where everyday objects come to the handy of a conservator.
What did you use?
We had medical bandages. You go to Boots and you raid the first aid counter, and then you have bandages that set hard when you wet them. So it originally used to be made of cast bandages, but now we use resin bandages, and you wrap it around the soil, and that kind of holds it all together while you're kind of moving it around. And so we lifted it out, put it on rigid support, and that then finds its way to the lab where we do the fine work.
And what do you do? What is the fine work?
The fine work is, so you have to obviously take all the soil away as much as you can to reveal the object. So you're kind of taking your miniature tools and you're kind of taking the soil away kind of carefully. But you also have to think about, so the boots were leather, so we had to keep wetting them every day because you don't want them to dry out.
No.
And then the scary part about the boots...
If they dry, they shrink, is that?
They do shrink. They do tend to shrink out of shape and kind of tear out, and which is really problematic with objects like the boots because there are significant features for the specialists that to date them and to then kind of date the skeleton.
Yeah.
So we don't want these features to be destroying themselves. So once we've done all the cleaning work, there's a specific way of treating the leather so that it doesn't dry out the way you mentioned. And and then we got them ready for the press.
Brilliant.
So
which you then got to do.
I got to
do. I
do.
don't know if you mentioned that.
I didn't get to. I thought I was on the BBC, guys. So we had a whole. They were released to the press on the 4th of December. The press went kind of crazy, and then comms was like, "Oh, BBC wants to interview you." Interviewed the Archaeologist, so they came. They spent like half a day with us, and they were really interested, and it was really great. Yeah. And then my mother got to see me on the television. She was like, "Lucie, I saw you on telly."
She's like, "Finally!"
It's like, finally, this was all worth it.
She's on TV for a minute. Phew.
Well, 2 because we were in the evening as well.
Oh, good point. What is the importance of doing conservation? Why is it important?
I mean, selfishly, I want to say that it's important because without us, you wouldn't have half of the objects that you have in museums or available for a study to specialists. Because we have that specialist knowledge about how to treat the objects, and it's very kind of sectioned. So you've got the archaeologists that bring us the objects, and then we treat them for specialists.
Yeah.
You look at you want to say something.
No. Just checking to make sure I've asked you all the questions.
Oh, okay, that's fine. You can edit that out.
No. What you're doing is you're one of those interviews that is very.
Drag on.
No, it's really upsetting because I can see that I'm coming to the end of how long it is, and I have like 100,000 more questions.
Okay.
For you.
All right. I'll just breeze through.
It just means we're going to have a part 2 at some point. Next time you're on the BBC.
That will be never.
Why you say that? You make it sound like people don't take enough attention of the conservators.
Yeah, I think conservators tend to be a bit overlooked. So I did a few kind of like phone interviews, and they're like, they don't ask you about how the boots survived or how did you get them out of the grounds, and this is like an important aspect of our work, I think. Yeah. And without us, I'd like to say this, without us there would be no boots. But
what question were they asking?
So they were asking, so was he murdered?
Right.
I don't know.
I see. So they're asking the wrong questions.
Yeah.
So they've got someone who knows some really interesting things about how the process works, and they want the nitty gritty of the story. They want the story.
I mean, it's interesting because you're like, these boots survived, and you want to know what do they tell about the skeleton. Obviously, what does it say about the period the skeleton lived in? But then not a lot of people ask, well, actually, how did the boots make it to us?
Yeah,
which is
it's just an assumed element.
It is a bit.
We
assumed.
dig it up, it ends up in a museum, and you miss out that middle bit.
You do miss out a little bit, and it makes me a little bit sad.
Oh, but at least you get to walk around museums going, did that. I did that.
Hey. Yeah, but then it's a bit like, I can take my boyfriend and my mom around and they'll be like, oh, that's so cool you did that. And then it's just like, yeah, but nobody else knows that I did that. So it would be great to kind of increase the visibility. But it's partly part of the conservation is partly responsible as well, because we do tend to lock ourselves up into like our little bubble and be like, yeah, it's our objects, we do this.
Yeah.
And we are kind of going towards moving in like public engagements, training our staff, the staff we work with, and reaching to a wider audience. We are starting to realise it's important. So
I genuinely think it's a really interesting part of archaeology.
I hope so.
Okay, 2 more questions.
Okay.
We're into the really nitty-gritty ones now.
Okay.
This is a new one from last week.
Okay.
Alright?
Yeah.
And I think I already know the answer.
Uh-oh.
Okay? Archaeology sight cat, archaeology sight dog. Which one do you prefer? Do you want a sight cat or a sight dog?
See, I'm a cat person, but I would rather have a sight dog.
Ah, why?
It's really difficult to wash cats.
That's maybe the perfect answer for a conservator. You're just looking at your cat with your tiny tools going,
no. I feel like a dog would be slightly more amenable to be washed down after a hard day on site.
Fantastic. Good. I'm glad I'm adding that one as a question. And finally, you work in the heritage industry.
Yes.
How would you like to be remembered?
I would like to find a way to be the link between either conservation and the general audience, or conservation and, for a broad conservation. I'm not going to say foreign. A broad conservation, because there is a bit of a gap. We are breaching the gaps, but there is a bit of a section between the different parts of different, cultural conservation. And I would really like to be that person who's like, yeah, I made, community engagement happen, and conservation is widely accepted in the world because I said this. That would be good.
I thought you were going to say something about the boots, but never mind.
Oh no, well, the boots, I'm over it now.
Yeah, sounds like it.
It's an old story now. Nobody's talking about it anymore.
Fantastic. Is there anything you would like to direct people towards with that in mind?
I guess if you are thinking about a heritage career and you're kind of looking into, there might not be, first-hand information that available. It might be a bit difficult to find, but I think it's really worth looking into it, and different sections of heritage, and of course conservation. And it's never too late to go back into heritage. I have loads of friends who decided they were not going to be in chemistry, and they wanted to be in conservation. So it's never too late to go back into heritage, never too late to go back into conservation. So if you're interested, just go and look. Have a look.
Lucie Altenburg, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, merci.
Merci beaucoup.
You've been listening to the Ask an Archaeologist podcast with me, Paul Duncan McGarity. The music you were listening to was by From the Ashes. Check them out on Bandcamp. It was produced by me, Paul Duncan McGarity. Follow me on Twitter at AskAnArch, or you can send an email at askanarch@gmail.com. But most importantly, if you've enjoyed yourself, if you think you have a friend who might be interested in the podcast, please tell them about it. Write a review, put up a star rating, let people know that we're here. It's incredibly helpful, much appreciated. Once again, thank you to everyone who has asked an arc. Bye-bye.